And thanks to the awesome foundation for waking everybody up for me. So it occurs to me after a day of hearing from all these amazing organizations about how to work better with government that I might be about to tell a story about working better against government, or at least at the beginning. That's how we found ourselves, and there's been a journey and an evolution there. But I'm one of the co-founders and the co-CEO of Josephine. We are a platform that lets home cooks sell meals directly to their friends, neighbors, communities. Behind the scenes, we have tons of food safety and business education, as well as pretty much everything to make that business easy for a home cook to run. So business insurance, third-party food safety training, as well as our own food safety training. And we have intentionally and unintentionally really backed into a ton of civic engagement and policy work, and that's what I've got about 10 minutes to tell you about. So the beginning of this journey was about 3 years ago. We started working with home cooks in Oakland, California, with pretty much no real hypothesis on how we were going to work with them. We were curious. My two co-founders are both first-generation immigrants. We were curious particularly about what was happening to home cooking within immigrant communities, but also just across the board, thinking about how the food landscape was changing and specifically how it was impacting the nourishers, the people that are so much a core of our social fabric and feed all of us, but it increasingly felt like they were being cut out by the Soylent, the on-demand delivery, the future of food kind of movements. And we tried everything under the sun for about a year. So we did dine-in, we did takeout, we did school lunches, we did supper clubs, all with basically the intent of finding a sustainable means of income opportunity for folks that were either working in the professional food world or at the margins of the professional food world, but particularly with an eye towards the folks that were kind of disenfranchised by or disillusioned by the professional food world. So the abuelas doing tamales on the weekends, the folks doing barbecue after church or doing potlucks with groups of friends, and we settled on this model of takeout to go. So you as a customer will actually go to a Josephine cook's home. This is a cook that's been run through a food safety training program and a kitchen inspection, and then you can pick up to-go dinner or lunch from that home cook. We started in Oakland, ran for about a year with probably a healthy amount of optimism and an unhealthy amount of naivete about how maybe our good intentions and our openness about what we were trying to do might be perceived. So we formed, tons of partnerships with local food justice, labor justice organizations, partnerships with schools. We structured ourselves as a private club, similar to like a cannabis club or different ways that folks avoid laws. And we did what Lyft did in the early days, where we accepted optional donations rather than charging for meals. And we basically tried to present ourselves as this activist organization working on behalf of small cooks to provide a new economic opportunity, and we hoped for the best. About a year in, we had our first series of surprises, which was basically that the outreach that we got from Oakland, so Alameda County and Berkeley Public Health, was downright hostile. It wasn't curious or interested in the impact of our work as we had hoped, but it was it was just hostile. And so that was about 2 years ago, and at that point we kind of got serious about policy work and civic engagement, and so we introduced a bill in late 2015, early 2016 at the state level in California to try to create a new permit class for home kitchens to do micro-enterprise cooking. So basically, you're allowed to do potlucks in home kitchens right now, but as soon as someone gives you $10, it crosses a legal threshold and becomes illegal. So basically, this is like the commercial potluck model that we're trying to legalize. But we started speaking really publicly and openly about acknowledging the issues with the model, acknowledging and talking about wanting to provide a voice for these cooks in our community that oftentimes were working in the shadows because they'd been asked implicitly or explicitly by the existing food world to remain in the shadows, to remain silent. If you're gonna hustle and do tamales, you know that it's for them. A lot of folks know that it's not fully legal if they're doing it out of their home kitchen, but there wasn't really an avenue for these folks to have voice. So we started doing tons of, I guess, what at the time we thought was civic engagement. So profiles of these cooks in Oakland, a lot of press and radio, and thought, again, hope for the best. This was about like 4 months into doing this. Basically, we learned in retrospect that this was perceived as like letting the cat out of the bag by regulators. There was a sting operation in Oakland where about a dozen of our cooks, many of whom, retired or stay-at-home parents from underrepresented communities, were issued cease and desist, and it was. Well, it was just traumatic for everybody, and it was when we first started to grow up, I guess, about what, as a tech innovator, policy, like serious policy and civic collaboration needed to look like. So we, I guess, May of a year ago, we fully shut down our May of 2016, we fully shut down our operations in California. We extracted an agreement actually at the state level from health regulators to collaborate with us on V2 of the legislation that we were proposing. And we started thinking about what were the tools and process that we were going to use to become real, earnest, active civic collaborators and engage our communities in ways other than kind of just the feel-good stuff. Like we knew that we were activists, we knew who we were working for, but the message that we were putting out there publicly was, a series of profiles on cooks that it felt like any sort of company could put out. So the first step of that, and the reason I'm so excited to be here today, is figuring out what the tools and processes were, recognizing that there's all sorts of folks that have been doing civic technology, civic collaboration work and tools and process for a long time. And the first step was almost in retrospect what I would think of as figuring out how to yell effectively at government. So we had a lot of hundreds of people come to us after our shutdown and basically ask how they could be angry. And we had people independently be angry, but also coming to us. And so the first step was, we created a petition. We used a tool called Phone to Action to start propelling some of that enthusiasm towards elected officials. We got over 30,000 petition signatures. And we formed a working group with about 35 food and labor justice organizations, as well as other interested groups to work on the legislation collaboratively in California. We also took it as an opportunity to relaunch in 2 new cities with a very different model. So we relaunched about a year ago in Portland and Seattle, or about 3 months after our shutdown in California. And when we relaunched, we immediately, they were soft launches with just a few dozen cooks, and we went immediately to not just the regulators whose jobs were on the line when they didn't know how to deal with the ambiguity of our model, but we went to their bosses at the state agencies and to elected officials, and were able to get stays of enforcement in Portland and Seattle and start the hard work of actually co-creating a model that might be workable rather than oppositional with this existing system, the existing commercial food regulatory system. And that's been a long road. So we're about a year into basically trying to get pilots approved in Portland and Seattle, and so far neither one of them has formally approved a pilot, even though we have stays of enforcement there. But the pilot proposals that we put together have been co-drafted with local economic development, with, in the case of Portland, the mayor's office, in the case of Seattle, the city council. We've also worked with 2 or 3 community development corporations in each of the cities, and have started to try to become sophisticated about not just yelling effectively at government, but figuring out what the tools for co-creating and engaging in a process look like. And we've got a lot of work to do on that, but in Seattle, I was just up there yesterday for the task force that we have going there, with about 30 folks set up by the Secretary of Health, from the State Board of Health, from a lot of the opposition groups like the restaurant lobby, the hospitality associations that are threatened by our model. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get as many of the cooks at the table as we would like yet, just due to the fact that we haven't set up those groups. But I guess the open question that we are now engaging with, and what I am excited about here and would love to talk about with anybody afterwards, are given the tools, the technology, the cutting edge thinking about how people work well with government on shared goals. How do you work effectively, not against necessarily, but in these sort of oppositional relationships, or how do you work as an innovator to change a system in a thoughtful, meaningful way that's not just, we're going to break things and fail fast and outrun the regulators. And so we've started to use a few tools, like a third-party co-inspection tool that regulators can have access to independently from us. We've started to set up basically a participatory MOU creation, a memorandum of understanding creation, where the public can provide input as well as us through that task force process on what they want to see, what they'd be willing to, what risks they're willing to take on as public eaters in a community. And I think that there's a lot more out there in terms of how we can start to move into the next phase of our work, which is now, I suppose, as a civic tech company in some ways that's going out to cities and saying, who wants us, who wants to work together on economic development, food access, all these benefits we know come from small scale community kitchen and being able to sell food from home. And we're hoping in a few months to announce our first formal partnership with a city that's invited us to come in, but we think that there'd be a lot of benefit that we could reap from figuring out some new tools to use and engage civically and develop policy more collaboratively, even though we're maybe a threatening innovator from the perspective of some entrenched institutions. So that's our experience. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you again to Innovate Your State.